In many parts of the world, the chance to earn money and provide for families are slim. Many families cannot afford proper education for their children. Their opportunity to learn, grow, and achieve their dreams is often out of reach. To understand this issue better, we conducted interviews with teachers to get their perspective.
Poverty would mean that you are above or below a line to make your life livable, so you can have food, clothing, shelter, and all of that. So I think that would be a level at where you either have enough or you don't have enough.
Not being able to make choices about what you want to do, what you want to do in life.
Poverty would be when people are not able to meet their basic needs such as food, shelter, water, clothes. In today's day and age, access to education should also be considered. So that's how I would define poverty.
About 9.2% of the world, or 719 million people, live in extreme poverty, on less than $2.15 a day. The continent with the most poverty is Africa, as almost every second person living in the states of sub-Saharan Africa lives below the poverty line. Education has been a crucial tool in uplifting indigenous communities out of poverty by providing them with the necessary skills and knowledge to secure employment. For example, indigenous people have historically faced discrimination and exclusion in the job market due to systemic and cultural barriers. By providing access to quality education, indigenous people can break the cycle of poverty and build a brighter future for themselves and their communities.
I believe there is a strong link between education and poverty. I don't mean that you have to go to university and get master's degrees and PhDs, but I believe that there's a strong link between basic education, so the reading and the writing, the basic tools that all people should have when it comes to education. So not university, not a trade school or something like that, just that you have the ability to speak, to read, to write, and things like that.
Yeah, so if you want to move somebody from having absolutely nothing to having the basics of life, education is definitely required. So you would want them to understand the basics of health, healthy eating, sleeping being very important. Most people don't know that. It is simple method education.
There's a huge link between lack of education and poverty. Education, as we know, empowers you and ensures that you have a good future moving forward. You're aware. Being educated enables you to acquire many skills and basically ensures that you can survive, not just in employment, but you can also survive in life in general. So lack of education will be it's the complete opposite. People are not simply aware what they should do to better their lives.
It is no coincidence that the sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rate of education exclusion globally, according to the UN. Nearly 60% of youth aged 15 to 17 are not in school. On the topic of lack of access to education, did you know that over 250 million children around the world lack basic literacy and numeracy skills? According to UNESCO, 258 million children and youth were out of school in 2018, and 53% of children in low and middle income countries cannot read and understand a simple story by the end of primary school. We have not only found that there is a link between a lack of access to education and poverty rates, but have identified it as an extremely important issue in many countries around the globe, especially in Africa. As for the local situation, indigenous communities in Malaysia often suffer from poverty, which is closely linked to a lack of education. According to a study by the United National Development Programme and Economic Planning Unit, poverty affects over 30% of indigenous people in Malaysia compared to the 0.7% of the national average. This poverty often results in parents being unable to afford to send their children to school, leading to a lack of education among indigenous communities. Additionally, the lack of access to education worsens poverty as it limits opportunities for individuals to acquire the skills and knowledge necessary to secure higher-paying jobs. This cycle of poverty and lack of education is a significant challenge facing indigenous communities in Malaysia.
Wouldn't say that there's too much difference between the poverty between Malaysia and America. Americans are struggling just as Malaysians are. I would say if you go to places in Tennessee, Kentucky, and some of the rural areas in the southeast, there's some horrible poverty, people still living in caves. There's groups called blue people, and just because of their lack of money, lack of things, they're there. So I don't think that it's any difference between Malaysia and here. I think there might be more people in my country than there are in Malaysia just because the population's bigger. But I don't think there's any difference between poverty here and poverty in America.
My country's got winter and people die because they get cold. So in Malaysia there are hungry people, very hungry people, and people who are affected by floods. But not many people die here from being poor. They are very uncomfortable and their lives are not at an acceptable level. But in South Africa, people die.
In my home country, there are many different levels of poverty. There are people who live in extreme poverty because they don't have access to clean water, they don't have access to nutritious food, and in many cases they don't have access to education, even though it's free throughout the country as well. But I would suppose in Malaysia it's slightly better. I think being a smaller country in comparison in terms of population and size, the poverty in Malaysia may not be as extreme as back in my home country.
The Bangi people in Pulau Bangi, northern tip of Sabah, are the poorest people in Malaysia at least.
It's difficult for me to say because I haven't looked at the statistics. I'm not quite up to date with that. But if I have to make a guess, I think it would be people obviously who don't have access to education. It could be people in areas where there's lack of awareness or there are problems with governance, I guess. Yes.
Access to quality education is recognized globally as a solution to poverty, as it can open the door to jobs and other improvements for the economy. Various organizations such as the UN and the World Bank have implemented programs and initiatives to increase access to education, particularly for girls and women. For example, the Global Partnership for Education supports education in over 70 low-income countries, and the UN's Educate a Child program aims to reach 10 million out-of-school children by 2030. These initiatives are important steps towards reducing poverty through education. Locally, non-profit charities such as Suka have been giving quality education to communities that don't have access to such things, supporting six indigenous preschool classes with a total of 150 students between 4 to 6 years old. It is evident that these charities are in dire need of funding in order to continue their amazing efforts. We need your help to continue funding these vital programs and make education accessible to more children in poverty. We also would like to again provide another survey to the students just to see if your opinions have been changed from this video.